Hello! Welcome back to the Shelland Show. So, it's been a hell of a day here. I didn't upload for a week because every time I literally tried 3 days in a row to upload and my phone just said, nope, not gonna do it. So I got frustrated. But we are back at it here. Had an upload this morning. Very happy about that. Let's see here. Kind of just recapping everything and what this show is kind of about. NPR takes our tax dollars. Now, NPR is government funded. It's not 100% government funded, but it is funded by the government. So these little vlogs here, it's just me driving home from work, listening to NPR, and just kind of looking at the biases that I've been listening to literally every morning for the past 5 years. I listen to NPR so much. I listen to NPR hours a day. I listen to it while I'm getting ready for work, and I listen to it, coming home from work. And I was like, I just find myself, not just disagreeing with it, but just the flat out biases. NPR can give a great interview. NPR can do a fantastic interview, but it's only a great interview when it comes to a Republican. Otherwise, we're dealing with basically, it ends up being a mouthpiece for Democrats whenever Democrats are on the show. And another thing I've noticed is they love to bring on Republicans who are liberal on a certain issue. So when they're covering an issue, they go and they find these Republicans that are more liberal on these issues, like gun background checks, opioid addictions and things like that, and they claim that, hey, this person on the other side of the aisle agrees. What's going on here? This is the middle ground. It looks like. No, they're picking the people that they know will kind of toe the line for them, and then they're able to present it as being showing that the opinions of the general electorate, they're actually for this, these kind of things, and it's completely ass backwards how they do a lot of things. And they basically get away with it because NPR, it's not well known. Many people must not listen to it, but what they were just talking about, they were talking about how Oklahoma just settled a lawsuit with Johnson & Johnson. They're going to be appealing it, but Johnson & Johnson more or less just lost the lawsuit where they had to pay $500 million to the state of Oklahoma due to the opioid crisis. Johnson & Johnson, they sell, they have patents on opioids, and they sell opioids. And, obviously we have an opioid crisis in this country here. And they're basically just talking about how Oklahoma had sued Johnson & Johnson for $17 billion, and they only got $500 million from Johnson & Johnson. My question when it comes to this is, there's no doubt that opioids carry risks, that they have a high likelihood of creating a tolerance. They take people, normal people who, get injured, come down with cancer. It takes them and it makes them dependent. There's lots of stories out there where people have, become, more or less drug addicts due to something that was prescribed by their actual doctor there. Here's my issue with there being a judgment on Johnson & Johnson. These pills are still legal to prescribe. They are still able to be given out. These pills are not illegal. They're still being prescribed at a huge rate. When it comes to pain remediation, opioids are some of the best medications you can get for that. There are, especially in heavy cancer patients, ones not just terminal, but people are having a rough time with pain. They are prescribed and actively will be prescribed opioids. So here's my question: is why are Johnson & Johnson has never prescribed a opioid medication to a patient. Johnson & Johnson, has basically just provided this. Where is the USDA in ensuring the public safety? Johnson & Johnson, they're claiming that they had understated the risks of becoming dependent on the drugs there, which could be seen. However, Johnson & Johnson did not push these pills. Doctors did. If a doctor prescribes something, should they not be responsible for its side effects? And should they not be, we've been prescribing opioids for 20 years now. We know the risks associated with it. It just seems very odd to me that they would have to pay a fine for a service that they are providing and continue to provide in a legal manner. That's the issue I have, especially when you blame the whole opioid crisis. We've known about this for how many years now? This has been a known thing for at least 5 years, and it's not like we are stepping away from opioids in any way. There is an actual need. It's high risk, high reward type medication there. So it seems to me that to pin the blame on these companies for providing and creating these medications that a lot of people are taking advantage of, I feel like that is a misuse of government time and power. But here, let's just kick back and listen to a little NPR here then.
Which provides unrestricted support to individuals.
I always cut in during the commercial.
Theater through the Doris Duke Artist Awards.
Well, now to Duluth for a story of environmental cleanup where the St. Louis River meets Lake Superior. That river once provided Duluth's industrial heartbeat, but it's also left behind a legacy of contamination from century-old mills and factories. Over the last several years, there's been a major push to restore the river, but to do that, first, the city has to dig up its past. Dan Crocker has more.
Duluth's fortunes were built largely on the iron ore and shipping industries, but for a short period of time around the turn of the 20th century, Duluth was a timber town.
We were the center of the universe as far as producing lumber was concerned.
Tony Durkins is a Duluth historian who chronicles the industry in the book he wrote with Marianne Norton, Lost Duluth. From 1900 to 1910, Duluth sawmills produced more than 3 billion board feet of lumber. If you laid all that wood down end to end, you'd cross the continental U.S. more than 200 times. Thousands of people worked in mills built on docks over the St. Louis River, where the leftover scraps of wood got dumped. Durkin says many of the mill workers lived in a neighborhood called Slab Town.
And the folks were so poor that they would take these slabs of bark out of the river, dry them off, and that's the fuel they used for their stoves, to heat their homes, to cook their food.
But most of that wood was left behind in the river.
So as we come along here, you guys will see some of these old remnants of the mills. So these pilings and pieces of the foundation that are still sticking out of the water.
Minnesota DNR Habitat Coordinator Melissa Scholand is on a pontoon boat pointing out an area called Grassy Point. It's a wetland. It's now a small city park, tucked next to a dock where ships load with coal and limestone. It's also the spot where 2 big sawmills were located at the turn of the 20th century. The wood they left behind now clogs the bottom of this shallow bay. It's up to 20 feet thick in some places, most of it hidden underwater.
It all just sank into the wetland, and this is the kind of material that's down there now. So obviously not something that you could sell for construction.
River restoration ecologist Pat Collins says all that waste left behind more than a century ago has sucked the life out of this part of the river.
You would expect a lot of vegetation growing in here that's providing places for little bugs to live on and for fish to come in and eat the bugs, waterfowl to eat the plants. None of that is growing here. It's all this wood, and it goes down so deep that it just doesn't allow for those sorts of plants to grow on it.
So the DNR plans to remove the wood, about 17,000 dump trucks full. But instead of dumping it in a landfill, they'll use it to build new habitat. The old lumber will form the foundation of a new island nearby, which will provide shelter for plants and fish. The DNR hopes it will also become bird and wildlife habitat. But all that old wood doesn't allow stuff to grow on it. So at the same time the DNR is removing the submerged lumber, it's also scooping out huge amounts of nutrient-rich sediment that big storms have washed into nearby Kingsbury Bay. The DNR's Scholin says they'll take all that good dirt and use it to cover the new island they're building.
These two projects are being done simultaneously because the sediment here at Kingsbury Bay is actually pretty valuable. It's got high organic matter, it's contaminant-free.
And it contains the tiny bugs and plants that can bring life back to the old sawmill area at Grassy Point. Spanning 240 acres at a cost of about $15 million, Scholin says this is the largest habitat restoration project the DNR has ever undertaken. And it's just one piece of a much larger effort to clean up the legacy pollution left behind by timber, steel, shipping, and other industries in the St. Louis River. Barb Huberty, who heads up that larger effort for the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, says cleaning up the river has benefits beyond the environmental.
This is not only a natural engine for the biology of this area, but it's an economic engine. So as we clean it up, we're revitalizing that economic engine.
The city of Duluth hopes to use that revitalization to jumpstart new development along its southwestern corridor. It's investing in river access and trails to help draw tourists and new residents, to emphasize that Duluth is not just a city on Lake Superior, but also a river town. Dan Crocker, NPR News, on the St. Louis River.
I want to take you back in time for a moment here. While you're enjoying the 70-degree day in Minnesota, let's remember February, the polar vortex, those wind chills that were up to 65 below, air temperatures close to 30 below. We were so cold we were looking for any good that might come from that bone-chilling weather. You might remember the one little beacon of hope we had was the cold weather could slow the spread of emerald ash borer. You might remember we talked with Rob Vanette. He directs the Minnesota Invasive Terrestrial Plants and Pests Center at the University of Minnesota. He's also a research biologist with the United States Forest Service. Well, here's Rob again today to check in. We want to find out what happened to those bugs responsible for so many lost trees in Minnesota. So he joins us via Skype today with an update. Hi, Rob.
Hey, Tom.
All right, we've thawed out. You've been out in the field to check. What did you find when it comes to the effects of the cold we had this winter on the emerald ash borer?
Yeah, so this was not an easy job, and so I have to thank my colleagues at the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. So they went around the state and peeled off the bark of several ash trees. Remember that emerald ash borer spends the winter as a little larva beneath the bark of an ash. Those beautiful green beetles, they were long gone. And their challenge was to say, how did they do? And it turns out that a lot of those larvae died because of the effects of the cold.
Good.
But it did depend on where you were in the state.
So give us an example. Where did we see more deaths of those larvae?
Well, there were three primary locations that were checked, and it was quite surprising. So when you looked here in the Twin Cities, Fort Snelling State Park was a good representation. And there, we only saw between 40 and 86% mortality. That's still a lot of death, but it wasn't the most dramatic place in the state.
I know you say only 40 to 86. It doesn't sound bad from a standpoint, but where did you see more?
Well, if you go up to Duluth, it was anywhere from about 70 to nearly 90% mortality. But the big winner was Sauk Center. And there, we saw over 80 to nearly 100% mortality of those insects.
Good.
Does it correlate to the temperatures, the low temperatures in those places? Because I remember everybody got pretty cold. It was a matter of just a few degrees, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it does. So the pattern matches very nicely with the rule of thumb that we talked about last winter. So if you'll recall, we were saying that when the insects get down to around minus 20, we expect 50% to be dead. And if they get to minus 30, we expect about 90% mortality. And that pattern matched very nicely with what we were seeing out in the field.
Now, the colds, it sounds like it will not be enough to stop the spread of emerald ash borer, but this puts a dent in it?
It puts a big dent in those populations. Yeah. And it's great news for managers who are having to deal with this really difficult problem. The cold didn't get rid of emerald ash borer, and we want to emphasize that point, but it did buy managers another year or two to help deal with this difficult situation.
So for you, no surprises here, as predicted and expected.
Very much so. But the other part that we want to remind people about is that the cold didn't heal the trees. And so emerald ash borer had done quite a bit of damage to ash trees in many parts of the state through last fall. And so this year we've been seeing several trees succumb to that damage. And so particularly in the Twin Cities, we're seeing big upticks in the number of dead ash trees around the metro.
Rob Vanette speaking to us from his office at the St. Paul campus of the U of M via Skype. Thanks so much.
Thanks for your interest in the story. Appreciate it.
It's Rob Vanette. He directs the Minnesota Invasive Terrestrial Plants and Pests Center at the U of M. He's also a research biologist with the U.S. Forest Service as well.
It's really too bad. Emerald ash trees are beautiful. They're gorgeous, and they're kind of like a staple of Minnesota.
Continue with all things considered as we round the curve to 5:30.
There are companies that have signature sounds, of course, the roar of the MGM Lion or the chord that Apple computers play when they're turning on. Of course, now other industries want in.
Appliance manufacturers are also really trying to get into this game of making like bespoke, emotionally evocative tones.
Okay, I'm Kai Rizdal. When your washing machine tells you a story in song. Next time on Marketplace.
Marketplace at 6 p.m. with its own signature sound here on NPR News 91.1. I'll do the numbers and tell you that the Dow, the NASDAQ, S&P 500 were all down, but not by all that much. 72 in the Twin Cities right now. Thunderstorms may produce gusty winds and small hail through the evening and even to around midnight, then partly cloudy with a chance of rain at 40% overnight. 5:30, the Chinese don't just make stuff for the U.S., they buy stuff from the U.S.
Over the last 5 years, China has become the largest market to sell into for many of America's largest companies, like Starbucks, like Nike.
Ahead on NPR News, how the trade war has created new worries for such companies, and the Illinois Democratic Representative Lauren Underwood is running for re-election in a red-leaning district. More on the politics of that, too.
Live from NPR News in Culver City, California, I'm Dwayne Brown. The opioid ruling against Johnson & Johnson in Oklahoma is resonating across the country as many state, local, and tribal governments are suing the pharmaceutical industry for its role in the addiction epidemic. From North Country Public Radio, Brian Mann reports.
The amount Johnson & Johnson was ordered to pay, roughly $500 million, is small measured against the scale of the opioid epidemic. But attorney Paul Hanley, who's suing drug companies on behalf of local governments, points out this was just one court in one state.
If you extrapolate that amount across all the cases that Johnson & Johnson is facing, you are in the tens of billions of dollars.
Johnson & Johnson plans an appeal, but experts say this first ever opioid ruling also sends a signal that governments might be able to force the wider drug industry to pay for things like drug rehab and law enforcement. The next big trial is scheduled in a federal court in Ohio in October. The stakes in that case are even higher, with 24 drug companies being sued at once by hundreds of cities and counties. Brian Mann, NPR News.
Two members of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, a Democrat and a Republican, say Russia is denying them visas to go to Moscow. NPR's Michelle Kellerman has the story.
Democrat Chris Murphy says he believes it's important to maintain a dialogue with Russia, especially during moments of tensions. So he says it's unfortunate that Russia is blocking his visit. Republican Ron Johnson describes Russia's decision to deny him a visa a, quote, petty affront. Russia suggested this may be a tit-for-tat move, pointing out that it's been calling on the U.S. to lift a visa ban against some Russian lawmakers. The State Department says it was ready to support the visit by the senators who are members of a committee that oversees U.S. sanctions and who wanted to assess the prospects for better relations. Michelle Kellerman, NPR News, the State Department.
You are listening to NPR.
Support for NPR News.
I do not like, and it's similar to the Israel banning Rashida Tlaib. I do not like the idea that we are shutting down conversations across countries. Believe me, I am not someone who believes in large government. I do not believe in, like the United Nations shouldn't have power over me in any way. I didn't elect them, and they shouldn't decide things for us. But to not have communication between countries is a pretty scary thing.
A DFL state lawmaker wants to protect Minnesotans from unexpected bills for air ambulance services. Representative John Hewitt plans to push legislation next year requiring hospitals to provide patients with information about how much air ambulances cost. He says patients transported by helicopter should not be surprised when they get a bill that can reach tens of thousands of dollars.
Helicopter patients are usually critical care patients, and they get home and they open up the bill. One of the highest bills they have, they got a ground transport bill for, let's say, $2,000, but their helicopter bill is $40,000.
Hewitt outlined his proposed legislation today during a meeting with representatives of several air ambulance services that operate in the state. Another U.S. Supreme Court justice is coming to the University of Minnesota for a lecture in a series put on by the law school. Brian Bax reports.
Associate Justice Elena Kagan will be featured on October 21st before an audience of thousands. She'll take questions from Professor Robert Stein, the school's former dean. She's the latest in a parade of high court justices who have headlined the event. Past participants include Chief Justice John Roberts, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Justice Sonia Sotomayor, and the late Justice Antonin Scalia. Kagan recently entered her 10th year on the Supreme Court. She was nominated for the lifetime appointment by Democratic President Barack Obama in 2010 and confirmed that August by the Senate. Brian Baxt, NPR News.
A bipartisan group of Wisconsin lawmakers wants to set a minimum age for purchasing vaping products and raise the minimum age for purchasing tobacco and nicotine. A bill would prohibit the sale of vaping products to anyone under 21 and move the minimum age for purchasing nicotine and tobacco from 18 to 21. In sports, Minnesota...
Go fuck yourselves, okay? This is the thing I don't understand is you get liberals, liberals are, let's legalize pot 18 or 21 plus, it's my own personal choice, I should be able to, I'm not affecting anyone else. The exact same argument can be used for vaping, it's even, oh fuck, I fucked up. I just can't understand, I fucked up again. I can't understand why on one hand we talk about it being a personal choice, someone's personal choice, and then on the other we talk about how we need the government to protect 18-year-olds that could be sent off to war from a fucking vape pen. Are you fucking kidding me? It's not your goddamn decision. What happens to the body autonomy arguments? If a girl can get an abortion at 18 but she can't buy a vape pen, does that make fucking sense? That's what I totally don't understand. A government funded abortion at 18, but she can't get a vape pen and she can't buy cigarettes until 21. That is absolutely fucking asinine, and it just shows how fucked our government system is. Roll that shit back. You don't need to make these decisions for ourselves. These kids, first of all, aren't gonna not get the shit. They're gonna get the shit. It doesn't matter. These stores don't give a fuck about if you're 18 or not. Sure, you can have these little stings, and then you can give them fines and make money off these companies that you catch not doing it once or twice. The thing is, it's no one gives a fuck. No one fucking cares if you smoke a vape. You should be able to smoke a vape. It doesn't matter. If these are true adults, let's start treating them like them. Let's stop being their parents. And you can take out a $30,000 loan for a feminist degree or a watercolor degree, whatever. But you can't smoke a vape? What the fuck? One thing I want to tell you, if you want to get absolutely fucked up legally, you don't even get fucked up on vape pens and shit like that. All you're doing is, you're basically just wasting money. Nicotine, it gives you a fun buzz, and then that's just something you need. You've seen me smoke, you know what that's like. If you want to get absolutely fucked up, eat a tablespoon of nutmeg, you idiots. nutmeg poisons you. That's how you get high off of it. So don't do it because you're poisoning yourself. But if that's something you want, when I was in high school, I ate nutmeg one time, and it will get you fucked up for 3 days. I never did it again after that. But do we start outlawing nutmeg? You can get high off banana peels. Like, what the hell? There's so much shit in the world. Why don't we allow ourselves to be considered adults, make our own goddamn personal decisions, and have our own consequences for that? It's not like we don't know what nicotine does. It's not like we don't know nicotine is addictive. You have to be living under a goddamn rock for 30 years, to not know that. Everyone fucking knows that. It's the stupidest shit in the world. It's really pissing me off. I'm so tired of these governments babying us. And in the end, all they're doing is restricting grown-ass adults that can get a $30,000 loan, that can go and get an abortion. There's so much bullshit. Where are your goddamn priorities? I'll tell you, you ain't got them. Or you're just listening to what's her name down the street, and you want to, basically carry the same torch as your neighbors. That's about it. It's about being liberally inclusive, I suppose. Guys, I have to go get groceries. I'm gonna go buy some chicken and some hummus. I bought some sriracha chips yesterday, and they're a bit too spicy, so I need something to blend them down. So I'm gonna go get my hummus, gonna get my chicken. I very much appreciate you guys tuning in, listening, watching here. I am going to have a brand new video put up tomorrow morning. I'm actually going to be checking and seeing if Facebook will let me go live and record the video at the same time. I'm not sure. I would assume that's how that would occur. So I'm gonna try to go live on Facebook. I'm porting all these videos over to Facebook. I'm gonna make sure we have a link in the description for my Facebook feed there. But yeah, nice quick half-hour episode. Yeah, I'm trying to think here. Yeah, I'm gonna be going into Cub Foods. I tore half the sole off the bottom of my shoe, so I'm gonna look like a fucking duck just walking in there. All right, so you guys have a great day. It's raining in Minnesota, so I'm gonna stay at home and play video games, but wherever you're at, have a good night.